equate this to a parent and child relationship somehow. And nobody wants a nanny state, but if you're a good parent, you're strict. Your child's putting its finger in the plug socket, you say, stop doing that, you know, whack their hand if you need to. But when a child is having a tantrum and screaming and crying, it needs something, right? So you have to figure out what that is. You do have to be strict with them, but you have to be empathetic and you have to listen. What you don't do is start hurling abuse and name-calling your child. And I think that sort of good parenting advice would go quite far now with Keir Starmer, who, yes, you do turn around and say the rioting, the sort of unwarranted destruction is not helping things at all. If you think this is going to make your point heard, it's going to have the opposite effect. But he needs to also say, but do you know what? I get that you're frustrated. I get that you're confused. I want to see why you're angry. And then we've got to do something about it. That part of the conversation has failed to happen.
Well, I'm a Conservative. Keir Starmer is not my favourite politician. But what I would say is that I want him to succeed. You know, it's not in the interest of our country to have a Prime Minister who's only elected a month ago and, you know, for him to fail. I think the problem is it was my party that threw the last election away. The Conservatives lost the election. Labour never won it. They never really levelled with the public about what they were going to do and how they were going to sort the country. Keir Starmer only ever really appeared in very controlled settings. He wasn't really subject to scrutiny. And so when we saw him in Southport this week, you know, laying the wreath for the... you know, for those atrocities that were committed. And when people were shouting at him from the sidelines, asking, demanding, crying out for some kind of response, he didn't respond like I think Boris Johnson or Nigel Farage or Tony Blair would have responded. You know, they had the gift to be able to, you know, respond to the public mood. And he doesn't seem to have that.
It felt
and I hope he can.
Like
I hope he can get it, but he doesn't have it. It seemed exactly like a photo call.
It felt very cynical. But I think that, you know, this is an issue we've got in politics in general right now, where instead of actually just talking to us, being authentic, being human, having a conversation like we're blimmin' adults, it's spin, it's nonsense, it's circumlocution, it's avoiding taboo, it's some sort of, you know, template of a chosen form of words that everyone can see right through. I mean, we need people to have a degree of emotional intelligence and talk like a human being.
And people will forgive a lot of disagreement with politicians if they feel that at least they're being honest with them. You know, lots of Americans can't stand a lot of what Donald Trump stands for. A lot of people who vote for Nigel Farage don't agree with him on everything, but they feel with politicians like that at least they're getting what they believe. They feel like they're being treated like adults, rather than given a sort of pre-prepared message that has been put together by a committee of people and that it could change next week. You know, authenticity, directness, honesty, those are qualities that I think are far too absent from our politics.
Well, let's speak now to Steve, who's, by the way, thank you to Phil in North Hertfordshire. Let's speak to Steve in Ipswich. Hi, Steve.
Hello, how are you doing?
I'm very well, how are you?
Excellent. Cross, furious, livid, disappointed, angry, all of the above. I watched a video this morning, and in that video, a collection of uniformed police officers wearing riot gear had hold of a member of the public who was clearly under arrest, clearly restrained and being held by several officers, and clearly had handcuffs on. The riot part of this appears to have been the other uniformed police officer in riot gear raining punches down on the head of this guy, and until he dropped his head under the weight of the assault, this particular officer brought his knee up for a face shot. Now, as far as I'm concerned, if this was a front line of a war zone, the Geneva Convention prohibits specifically that treatment of prisoners. How come there are police officers in this country who seem to think that is acceptable? The guy is arrested and restrained. He is in their custody and care. He is not there as a punch bag to be assaulted.
I mean, it's interesting, actually, because this also harks back, of course, to the incidents we saw at Manchester Airport. And we've got to be careful when we look at things online, because we see short bits and bobs. And what we learned about the Manchester Airport incident was, I mean, this police officer, I mean, frankly, yes, he should have been suspended and investigated. That goes without saying. But when we contextualise that situation, we saw quite the nasty, feral, uncontrolled, animalistic, bestial behaviour by those two young men.
Yeah.
And suddenly we thought, OK, things look a little bit different now. We don't know, well, I don't know whether you know, Steve, but I don't know about this particular incident and what led up to that sort of attack. And yet, once again, the question being asked by the British public after the Manchester airport offence was, these two kids were sat next to that gurning idiot of a lawyer, that grifter, that race baiter, who frankly just wants to sow discord in this country, sitting there taking selfies on a sofa saying, these poor two young lads, when they should have been bouncing off the walls of a prison cell.
Absolutely. But I think we have to be careful because all these incidents are subject to proper proceedings. But having seen that Manchester footage, before with the policeman, stamped his foot on the assailant, I know that if I had been in those circumstances, I would have lost control. But that's, of course, what the police are trained not to do. That's why they are police officers going through months, years of training, particularly if they're firearms officers, as they were in this case. They're trained not to do that sort of thing. They are meant to be in control.
But apparently Stephen Ipswich is saying that they've lost their rag now at another protester. This time, I'm guessing from what you're saying, Steve, it's, a sort of Anglo-Saxon man. I don't know, but I'm assuming that is what you're referring to. And, is there any sort of national outcry about this?
No, and I think there should always be a national outcry when police brutality takes place. I think the police have a terrible job. I think it's getting worse. The kind of lawlessness that they're facing on the streets of Britain seems to be deteriorating. We've talked already, Alex, about the nature of, the drugs coming into our country. I think that produces a level of violence that perhaps we haven't seen before in our country. So the thin blue line, as it's been traditionally called, is very thin at the moment.
Yeah.
What happened under austerity? A lot of new police officers have been recruited in recent years. But what was lost when those police cuts were made at the start of the period of austerity? We lost a lot of experienced officers. Police who've been on the streets for a long time. They've been in conflicts before. They've been in fights before. They knew what it was like to face an angry crowd. And, through your experience of that sort of situation, you're wiser. You're more able to deal with it. You don't overreact. The problem, I think, with our police force at the moment, and I wish them every support and success because they're our protection.
Yeah.
But a lot of them are very young. They've come, the qualification. You've got to have a degree now.
What's more,
they haven't had the experience that those old officers had.
We're importing narratives from America where actually police bashing is all the rage right now. Aren't the police horrible? Aren't they dreadful? Wasn't helped by the horrific Sarah Everard situation at all. But if we start eroding confidence in the police and it becomes fine to police bash, then we end up breaking that important civic
There was one social media video I saw in the last few days. I don't know whether you saw it. It was an American policeman having something thrown at him in a precinct in America, and the crowd just laughing. He's there, rolling around on the floor. And that really did make me sort of boil
thank you,
with
BLM.
Well, it was. I'm afraid there was there was a significant element of that, and the idea that someone howling in pain should be celebrated.
Yeah.
And I think the caption on the social media thing was "We're cooked," and I do worry the way direction society is going.